started as a faint glimmer in the dark, a pair of eyes reflecting the moonlight, unblinking, watching. Shift. Long, unnatural, and ever-changing. They twisted and writhed in a way that no creature should move. The night air was crisp and heavy with the smell of pine. The campfire crackled weakly, its embers fighting against the encroaching darkness. Lulled by their rhythmic dance, when a glimmer caught my eye, just beyond the circle of light, two reflective dots floated, unblinking. I squinted, dismissing them as the eyes of a deer, or maybe a raccoon, but the stillness that followed sent shivers up my spine. The glimmer shifted, not closer or farther, but sideways, jerky, unnatural, as if whatever it was, I had forgotten how to move like a normal animal. My breath caught when I noticed the limbs. They weren't just moving, they were changing. One moment, they stretched thin like branches. The next, they curled inward, as though the creature were collapsing into itself. The fire dimmed, and shadows seemed to grow denser around me. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it toward the glimmering eyes, but they vanished. For hours, I felt watched, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making my heart race. When dawn finally came, I packed up in a frenzy, watching. I left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of the woods. It started with rustling sounds at night. My bedroom window faced the backyard, where an old oak tree cast long shadows under the moonlight. One night, as I pulled the curtains closed, I rose. Two reflective eyes peered from beneath the tree. At first I thought it was an animal, but the way they glinted, steady and unblinking, felt wrong. I stared, hoping it would move, but it remained still. The next night the eyes were closer, near the edge of the yard. This time, I noticed movement, limbs, that seemed to extend and retract as though testing their reach. I wanted to. I believe it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. I left the outside lights on, but they seemed to do little to deter it. Over the next few days, I found odd trails in the dirt. Evening, as I sat by the window, I saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't just a shadow. Its form was fragmented, as if pieces of it flickered in and out of existence. When it stepped closer, I slammed the curtains shut and didn't open them again for days. But I knew it was still there, waiting. I hadn't planned to go so deep into the forest. It was supposed to be a quick hike to clear my mind. Mirror leaning against a tree. The reflective surface was cracked, yet it gleamed unnaturally, even in the dim light. As I approached, I felt a prickling sensation on my skin. That's when I saw the eyes, two reflective orbs staring at me from within the shattered surface of the mirror. My first instinct was to back away, but the limbs stopped me. They shifted and stretched beyond the mirror's frame, as though the creature inside was trying to escape. Woods around me seemed to warp. No matter which direction I turned, the trees all looked the same, and the trail I had followed disappeared. A low hum filled the air, growing louder as the limbs writhed more violently. I ran, tripping over roots and scraping my hands on the rough bark of trees. The faint glint of those eyes, always just behind me. When I finally broke free of the forest, my chest heaving, I turned back to see the mirror, now resting at the edge of the trees. The eyes were still there, watching, daring me to return. Running at night had always been my solace. The cool air, the quiet streets. It was my time to think. Corner. Saw them. Two reflective eyes glinting from the darkness of a nearby alley. I slowed, pretending I hadn't noticed. But the creature stepped out just enough for the light to catch it. I picked up my pace, hoping to put distance between us, but the sound of footsteps followed. They weren't normal footsteps. They were uneven, erratic, as if the creature was leaping and crawling all at once. I ran harder, but no matter how fast I went, the eyes appeared ahead of me, blinking, in and out of existence like some nightmarish game of hide and seek. When I reached my house, I slammed the door shut and locked it, my chest heaving. From the window, I saw it again, standing in the middle of the street. Its limbs shifted in the moonlight, almost lazily, as though it It was toying with me. It stayed there until dawn. The old railway tunnel had always been a source of curiosity, overgrown with vines and partially collapsed. It beckoned with the promise of mystery. As I stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth. My flashlight beam bounced off the graffiti-covered walls, and that's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was just an animal trapped inside, but as I moved closer, the eyes shifted, then froze, and the limbs appeared. They writhed unnaturally, stretching out to touch the tunnel walls. The creature's form was indistinct, as though it was made of shadow itself, and every time I tried to focus on it, the light seemed to dim. The tunnel grew darker, the air heavier. My footsteps echoed, but so did something else. Soft, deliberate, as though it was mimicking me before, warped, trapping me in its endless loop. The creature didn't chase me. It didn't have to. Its reflective eyes and shifting limbs were always just ahead, herding me deeper into the darkness. When I finally stumbled out into the daylight, I collapsed on the ground, shaking. I looked back, but the tunnel entrance seemed smaller, darker, as if it was retreating into itself. The eyes were gone, but I knew they'd be back. The first sign that something was wrong came late one night when I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the basement. It was subtle at first, almost like dripping water, but it grew, louder and more deliberate as the hours passed. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the pipes or an old house settling into the cold night, but curiosity, or perhaps fear, got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down the creaky wooden stairs. The basement smelled of mildew and dust, the air cold enough to make me shiver. The light from my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating boxes, old furniture, and cobwebs. That's when I saw them, two reflective eyes, staring at me from a corner, shrouded in shadows. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a stray that had somehow wandered in. But the way the eyes glinted, unmoving, sent a chill down my spine. Then the limbs emerged. They didn't move like anything I'd ever seen. They twisted and bent at impossible angles, almost as if they were testing the space around them. One limb stretched toward the light, retracting the other. The moment the beam touched it, like it was recoiling from being seen. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The tapping resumed, louder now, echoing off the concrete walls. It wasn't coming from the creature. It was coming from all around me, as if the basement itself had come alive. I scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room, clutching a bat, but the tapping never stopped. When morning came, I went back down, sunlight streaming through the small basement window. There was nothing there, but deep scrapes. The road was empty, stretching endlessly under the pale light of the moon. I was driving back from a late shift, the hum of the engine and the monotony of the drive lulling me into a daze. That's when I saw them, two reflective eyes staring at me in the rearview mirror. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light, but the eyes remained. They were far back, at first barely visible in the glow of my taillights, but then they moved closer, faster than should have been possible. The eyes weren't attached to anything solid, only shifting limbs that twisted and curled as they followed the car. I pressed the accelerator, the car lurching forward as I tried to put distance between myself and whatever was behind me. But the faster I went, the closer it seemed to get. The headlights flickered, the engine sputtered, and then, with a sudden jolt, the car stalled. The silence was deafening. The eyes were there, just beyond the windshield now, glinting in the dark. The limbs pressed against the glass, leaving smudges that looked like claw marks. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen refused to turn on. The creature didn't attack. It just watched, as if waiting for me to make the first move. Eventually, the lights of another car appeared in the distance. As they approached, the creature vanished, leaving behind only the marks on the glass. I never saw it again, but I avoid that road. Now, something about it feels cursed. The park was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you hyper-aware of every rustle and creak. I was sitting on a bench near the playground, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The swing set moved gently in the breeze, the creak of the chains oddly rhythmic. That's when I noticed them, two reflective eyes glinting from the shadows near the jungle gym. I froze, unsure of what I was seeing. The eyes were steady, unblinking, and far too large to belong to any animal I could think of. Then came the limbs. They moved like liquid shadow, stretching and contracting as the creature slinked closer. It stayed low to the ground, its form obscured by the growing darkness. I stood, my pulse quickening as I backed away. The creature didn't follow, not immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, the eyes narrowing slightly, as if it were studying me. I turned to leave, but the moment I did, I heard the faint sound of laughter. It wasn't joyful, it was hollow, echoing, like a child's laugh, distorted through an old recording. The path out of the park seemed to stretch on forever, the lights dimming one by one as I passed under them. I glanced back once, and there it was, standing in the middle of the playground, its limbs shifting erratically. The laughter grew louder, more chaotic, until I finally reached my car and sped away. I haven't been back to that park since. It started with a sound, a faint tapping that seemed to come from the roof. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was just a tree branch, brushing against the shingles. Impossible to ignore. I got up and peered out the window, but I didn't see anything. Then, as I was about to turn away, I caught a glimpse of them, two reflective eyes staring down from the rooftop of the house, across the street. They didn't blink or waver, just watched, unflinching. Noticed the limbs. They stretched unnaturally, bending in ways that defied logic. As the creature, I moved closer to the edge of the roof. I closed the curtains and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But the tapping continued, now directly above me, the strength of the roof. My heart raced as I heard a soft scraping, like claws dragging across the shingles. I didn't sleep that night. When morning came, I finally worked up the courage to go outside. The roof looked untouched, but as I turned to go back inside, I noticed claw marks on the window. Hey, ledge. Sure if the roof would be enough to keep it out. The old cabin groaned as I backed against the far wall, every creak of the wooden floorboards, amplifying the oppressive silence. The flashlight in my trembling hand flickered, casting erratic beams across the room. The broken doorway themselves were bending around it. Its limbs writhed, stretching unnaturally as though testing the limits of its form. One limb extended forward, brushing against the doorway. It didn't make a sound. It didn't need to. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I gripped the useless flashlight, its beam swallowed by the creature's shifting darkness. My eyes darted to the table where the sketches and writings lay scattered. Fragments of scrawled warnings screamed at me. Do not run. It feeds on fear. The more you look, the closer it gets. Rain of the wood. A trap. A feeding ground. It had lured me here, just as it had lured so many others. The air grew thick, almost choking. The reflective eyes blinked, and for the first time, the creature made a sound, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the walls. It wasn't a growl. It was a laugh, deep and resonant, mocking my attempts to resist. My legs buckled, and I fell too. My knees, the flashlight rolling from my grasp. The creature stepped fully into the room then, and its form, if it could even be called that, was a nightmare made flesh, limbs stretched and twisted like broken tree branches, constantly, shifting and reforming. Its face, if it had one, was a void, but the eyes burned into me, their glint promising something far worse than death. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My mind raced, replaying every decision that had brought Mayer, every chance I'd had to turn back. The creature loomed over me, its limbs curling toward my face. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it didn't come. When I opened my eyes, the cabin was empty. The creature was gone, or so it seemed. The flashlight was still on its side, the beam steady now, illuminating the table. Changed. Where once there had been scattered papers, there was now only one, placed neatly in the center. I crawled forward, my hand shaking as I reached for it. The paper was blank save for a single sentence written in dark wet ink. You brought it with you. The room grew colder, and a faint tapping began at the window. Slowly, I turned to look, my heart hammering in my chest. There, just beyond the glass, the reflective eyes stared back. If you dare, share this story. But remember, every retelling brings it closer to reality. Do you feel safe now? Or is something already creeping closer, just beyond the light? For years, I thought the bumps and whispers beneath my bed were just my imagination, or maybe the house settling at night. But last night, when I finally dared to peek beneath the darkness, I saw them. Legs that dragged across the floor, and eyes that burned like embers, staring back at me. Now, I'm not sure I'll ever be safe in my own room again. Growing up, I was always terrified of the dark. It wasn't the absence of light that scared me, but the idea of what might be lurking within it. My bedroom was my haven during the day, but at night, it transformed into a place of terror. The shadows grew long, stretching across the walls, like reaching arms, and the space beneath my bed became a void, a portal, to some unknowable abyss. I always told myself it was nothing more than my imagination, a childish fear I would outgrow, but deep down, I knew something was there. It started with small noises, a faint scuffling, like nails scraping against the wooden floor. Parents dismissed it as the house settling, but I wasn't so sure. Sometimes, I thought I heard whispers, too faint to make out words but enough to send a shiver down my spine. I began, sleeping with a flashlight tucked under my pillow, ready to chase away the darkness at a moment's notice. As I grew older, the noises didn't stop. If anything, they became more distinct. I started noticing patterns. The sounds always came from directly beneath my bed, and they only occurred late at night just as I was drifting off to sleep. I tried to ignore them, burying my head under the covers, but the more I ignored them, the louder they seemed to become. There were nights when I swore I saw movement from the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow that didn't match the faint glow of my nightlight. I convinced myself it was just imagination playing tricks, but my unease grew with each passing night. My friends thought it was hilarious when I mentioned it to them. The boogeyman lives under your bed, they'd tease. I laughed along with them, but the fear was real, gnawing at me like a festering wound. The night it happened started like any other. I went through my bedtime routine, brushing my teeth and triple-checking the locks on my bedroom window. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and reached for my flashlight. It was comforting, knowing it was there. The house was unusually quiet that night, and the silence was oppressive. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on my breathing, but just as sleep began to claim me, the sound came again, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I held my breath, straining to listen. It wasn't my imagination this time. Deliberate, growing louder, closer. Something snapped inside me. I was tired of being afraid, tired of feeling powerless in my own room. Trembling in my hand, my heart felt like it might burst as I lowered the flashlight, illuminating the darkness beneath my bed. That's when I saw it. At first, I couldn't comprehend what I was looking at. Two glowing eyes stared back at me, their light an unnatural shade of amber, like molten gold. They didn't blink, didn't waver, just bore into me, whispered an intensity that made my skin crawl, and then it moved. A pair of legs emerged from the shadows, twisted, malformed limbs that dragged uselessly across the floor as the creature shifted closer. The sound of its movements was sickening, like wet flesh sliding against wood. Its body was obscured by the shadows, but I could hear it, breathing shallow, rasping breaths that sent chills racing down my spine. I froze, paralyzed by fear. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The creature's eyes seemed to grow brighter, almost hypnotic, and I felt a strange pull, like it was trying to draw me in. My flashlight flickered, and for one horrifying moment, I thought it would go out entirely. The spell broke when the creature's hand, if you could call it that, reached out from the darkness, me to action, and I scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed in my haste. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a hardcover book, and hurled it under the bed. The creature recoiled with a hiss, retreating into the shadows. But the glowing eyes never left mine. I jumped off the bed and ran to the door, yanking it open and bolting down the hallway. A lifeline. I didn't tell them what I saw. How could I? They would never believe me. But I knew the truth. Something was living under my bed, something that wasn't supposed to exist. I refused to sleep in my room after that, opting to camp out on the couch instead. My parents thought it was a phase, another quirk of childhood, but I knew better. The creature didn't leave. Every so often I would hear the faint dragging sound, even from the living room. It was a reminder that it was still there, waiting for me to return. I never did. Moved out of that house a year later, but the memories stayed with me, haunting my dreams. Even now, as an adult, I can't bring myself to sleep in a room with an open space beneath the bed. I tell myself it's just an irrational fear, a remnant of my childhood trauma. But sometimes, late at night, I think I hear it again, that low, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. And I wonder if it followed me. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The whispers were faint, no more than a soft murmur, on the edge of hearing, blending with the creaks of the old house. But as the nights passed, they grew louder, more distinct. They weren't random noises. They were words, hoarse, guttural, and barely coherent. At first, I couldn't make out what they were saying, but one night, I understood. Don't look away. The words sent a chill through my entire body. I froze in bed, staring up at the ceiling, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the creature could hear it. I wanted to cover my ears, to block out the sound, but some primal instinct warned me against it. The whispers weren't a taunt. They were a warning. The next few nights were worse. The whispers became more urgent, repeating the same phrase, over and over, growing louder, as if the creature was desperate to make me listen. Don't look away. It's coming. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The fear was consuming me, but a part of me wondered, if the creature was warning me, what could possibly be worse than it? The first sign came a few days later. The air in my room changed, growing heavier, colder. It wasn't the kind of chill that could be fixed with an extra blanket. It was a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep into my bones. The whispers changed too. They weren't coming from beneath the bed anymore. They echoed from all around the room, surrounding me, and then I saw it. The space beneath my bed wasn't just dark, it was blacker than black, a void that seemed to devour the weak glow of my nightlight. Something was moving within it, but it wasn't the creature. The creature under my bed, its glowing eyes, its dragging legs, was nowhere to be seen. For the first time, I realized that it wasn't hiding from me. It was hiding from whatever was, emerging from that darkness. The whispers became frantic, overlapping in a chorus of warning. It's here, don't let it see you. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my flashlight, bolted from my bed, and pressed myself into the farthest corner of the room. My hands shook so badly that I could barely hold the flashlight steady, but I didn't dare turn it on. I didn't want to see what was crawling out of the void. For hours, or maybe it was minutes, time felt meaningless. I sat there, clutching the flashlight, and staring at the void. The thing inside it didn't fully emerge. I saw glimpses of it. A gnarled hand, skeletal and impossibly long. A shadow that rippled unnaturally, as if it weren't bound by the laws of this world. Its presence was suffocating, filling the room with a sense of dread, so profound that it felt like my heart might stop. And then I heard it, the dragging sound. But this time, it wasn't coming from beneath the bed. It was behind me. I turned, slowly, and there it was, the original creature, the one with the glowing eyes and dragging legs. But something was different. Its eyes weren't glowing with malice anymore. They were filled with fear. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the thing in the void. The creature's mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I could feel their intent. It wanted me to leave. It was protecting me. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I whispered back, "What do I do?" The creature's head snapped toward me, and for the first time, I felt a connection. It wasn't just a monster under my bed. It was something else, something that had been guarding me from. Finally, though, the horrors of the void all along. It dragged itself closer, gesturing toward the door with its clawed hand. "Go," it rasped, the word barely audible over the suffocating silence. I didn't leave. I don't know why, but I couldn't abandon it. For years, I had been terrified of the creature under my bed, convinced it wanted to hurt me. But now I understand. It had been there, all along, not to harm me, but to keep me safe. The whispers, the warnings, they weren't threats. They were its way of protecting me. The thing in the void began to stir, its movement slow but deliberate. The creature under my bed turned back toward it, dragging itself into position as if to shield me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything but watch as the two entities faced off. The air grew heavier, pressing down on me, until it was almost impossible to breathe. And then it happened. The thing in the void reached out, its skeletal hand stretching, impossibly, grasping for the creature, but the creature didn't flinch. It stood, or rather crouched, its ground, letting out a guttural snarl that echoed through the room. The thing hesitated. For a moment, everything was still, and then the void began to recede, shrinking back beneath the bed until it disappeared entirely. The suffocating pressure lifted, and I could finally breathe. As my heart rate settled, again, the creature turned to me, its glowing eyes dimmer now, but still filled with that same intensity. It dragged itself closer, and for the first time, I didn't recoil. I reached out, my hand trembling, and it placed one of its clawed fingers against me. "Sir," it rasped, before retreating back into the shadows beneath the bed. It had its... I never saw the creature again after that night, but I could feel its presence. My bed no longer felt like an abyss. It felt like a barrier, a shield against whatever horrors might try to come through. I no longer feared the dark, but I never forgot what I had seen. Even now, years later, I sometimes hear whispers in the dead of night. They're faint, barely audible, but they're there. And I know the creature is still watching, still guarding, keeping the void at bay. Because the thing in the void, it's still out there, and one day, it might come back. I clawed at the floorboards as the void beneath the bed pulled me closer, the skeletal hand around my ankle tightening its grip. My screams echoed through the room, swallowed, almost, instantly by the oppressive darkness. The walls seemed to shift, contorting and stretching as if the house itself was alive, a grotesque extension of the void. I reached out desperately, fingers brushing against the doorknob again. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered. If I could just pull myself free, if I could just reach that door, I might escape this nightmare. But then I felt it, a second hand, cold and sharp, wrapping around my other leg. It wasn't just pulling me, it was dragging me down. "No!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and raw. "Let me go!" The creature reappeared, its glowing eyes now dim and sorrowful as it emerged from the shadows. It might help me, that this thing I had feared for so long would finally save me. But instead, it spoke, its voice low and broken. "You belong." The words pierced me like a dagger. The grip on my ankles tightened, and the void surged, swallowing my legs and torso. I clawed at the floor, splinters embedding themselves in, up my fingertips. But it was useless. The more I struggled, the stronger the pull became. The creature leaned closer, its glowing eyes now only inches from mine. It placed a clawed hand on my chest, not to harm me, but to stop me from struggling. "Stop fighting," it rasped. "You can't leave." I froze, my breath coming in shallow gasps, like a suffocating blanket. The room began to fade, the familiar walls and furniture dissolving into blackness. The last thing I saw before everything vanished was the creature's face, its eyes, dimming until they were nothing but empty sockets. When the darkness lifted, I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. The floor beneath me was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of decay. The walls stretched upward into nothingness, covered in a slick, pulsating film that seemed alive. Gone, replaced by a swirling void that stretched endlessly above. I stood on trembling legs, the echoes of my own ragged breathing the only sound. But then, in the distance, I heard it. It was growing louder, closer, accompanied by whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. You belong here. The voice was not just one, but many, layered over each other in a cacophony of guttural whispers. Creatures, like the one under my bed but different, each more grotesque than the last, dragged themselves toward me. Their glowing eyes burned with an unnatural light, and their twisted limbs moved with an agonizing slowness. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls stretched endlessly in every direction, and the void above seemed to press down on me. My back hit something solid, and I spun, around to see a mirror tall and ancient, its surface cracked and fogged. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't me. The figure in the glass was pale, gaunt, and its eyes glowed with the same amber light as the creature's. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But it was. The reflection moved on its own, reaching out toward the glass, as if to pull me in. Behind it, more shadows writhed, their forms shifting and changing. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening until I could hear nothing else. "Help me," I screamed into the darkness. "Someone, please." The creatures paused, their glowing eyes narrowing as if my words had struck a chord. Moment, there was silence. Then, one of them, the one that had once lived under my bed, spoke again, its voice softer this time, almost mournful. "You belong here, because you let us in." The words echoed in my mind, bringing with them a flood of memories. All the nights I had dared into the darkness, my fear feeding the thing that lived beneath my bed. All the whispers I hadn't heard, had ignored, the warnings I had dismissed. I had let it grow, let it thrive, until it consumed everything. "No," I said again, but my voice lacked conviction. The truth was undeniable. I had made this place, and now I was trapped in it. The void began to rise again, swallowing the ground beneath me. The creatures moved closer, and their twisted forms circling me like vultures. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was my own reflection in the mirror, its glowing eyes staring back with a haunting finality. The house stands empty now, abandoned and silent, but those who pass by say they can still hear it. I've seen lights flickering in the windows, amber glows that vanish when approached. And sometimes, late at night, a locket appears beneath a child's bed, a stuffed animal, a notebook, little pieces of someone else's life, left behind like breadcrumbs. If you dare, share this story, but be warned, every telling strengthens the void. Every whisper you hear afterward might be your own fears taking root. Are you sure the space beneath your bed is empty, or have you already let something in?